Everyone, looks like we're getting quite a few people in and responding. We'll give you just another minute to hop in and say where you're located. Definitely exciting to see people are coming from a lot of different places all over the place. Give it until about 7:01 to let people keep popping in their answers. Interesting to see all these clusters. It seems like there's a lot of people grouped in the same places. Definitely lots of first teams located together. Great. So we'll get started then. Again, nice to see where everyone's from and that there's so many different people here from different places. So we're here tonight. Most of you are probably part of this Robots to the Rescue design competition by PTC using Onshape. So if you aren't familiar with that contest, we'll go a little bit into that later. I'm Mackenzie Brunel. I'm an application engineer at PTC. I'm actually a first alum. I was on Team 2648 in FRC Team 2648 in Maine, and now I volunteer as an FTAA, and then I also mentor FRC Team 125. And then we'll have Cody as our presenter tonight, going through a lot of the Onshape demos. He's our technical services manager, so his team does a lot of our training and teaching people about how to use Onshape. And then Marcelli is going to be here in the chat and kind of helping to organize everything to answer your questions. He's also on the academic team at PTC. And so if you do have any questions throughout, definitely feel free to enter those in the chat as we go along. So for the agenda tonight, I'll be giving a bit of an overview about this design competition. Then Cody will be getting into that introduction to Onshape, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. The design challenge is really to come up with a robot that solves a current world problem. So that can be anything, whether it's delivering medical supplies or trying to find a way to deliver food in these kind of uncertain times. There's not really any shortage of world problems right now, unfortunately. So it's up to your team to really come up with something creative that you can then work to solve, or potentially work in an alliance to solve with some other teams as well. And so if you haven't registered for that challenge, you can absolutely continue to register. They'll be going for quite a while. So this is going to give your team a chance to work on something while the season has been suspended. And so in order to submit that, what we're really asking for is just a write-up of what that world problem is that you're solving. So again, your team can come up with whatever that would be, why you think that problem is important, and then how your robot would actually go about solving that problem. And so then you would also submit your robot CAD model with that, so your assembly and then any parts you create. And there is an example of this submission on our competition website, so you can absolutely look at that and see what one of those submissions would actually look like. And so another poll, if you're interested in sharing, we'd love to see what the problem is that your team is solving. I'm sure there's a lot of creative answers out there, so definitely, again, interested to see what people have come up with so far. And so you can still use that same system you used before. If you put where you're located on there, you can see that same poll. You just go to that website that's listed at the top, or you can text the answer if that's easier for you to answer on your phone. Looks like we've got a few interesting answers. Garbage disposal. That's pretty interesting. Playground sanitation, that's definitely a big issue right now. I know a lot of people, I'm located in the Boston area, So a lot of people want to get out and bring their kids out while they're stuck inside. So having that would be great. I love that, putting your email in there if you want to do an alliance. That's a great idea. I'm sure there's a lot of teams looking for alliances, so make sure to put that down if you're still looking for an alliance. Tree planter. Still deciding. Yeah, it's definitely still early in the competition, and I think coming up with this problem, while there are, again, a lot of options, it can be difficult to figure out which one you want to settle on and actually work on. Grocery shopping. Yeah, definitely. Yes, there's definitely a lot of creative ideas and a lot of different ideas. So keep deciding for your teams if you're working on it. Definitely looking forward to seeing all the different options and what you guys come up with. Hopefully we'll actually solve some of the really troubling problems that we're having right now. But I think we'll give it just another second. Looks like there's a few more coming in, and then we'll move on. Medicine dispensing. Yeah, definitely need people to know what the 6 foot radius is. When I go out for my walks during the day, I definitely have some trouble with that. Nature. Great. So we'll move on then. So to find out the rules and guidelines, actually at the end there, saw a couple of questions come in. You can be looking at our website. We have a rules and guidelines section, and that's where you'll stay up to date. This is our first time putting on a design challenge like this, so we definitely understand if teams have some clarifications they're looking for. Definitely feel free to email us at first@ptc.com if you're wondering anything, if something doesn't make sense to you, and we'll add some of those clarifications to the website as we go along. So definitely keep checking there. And then you can sign up for email updates as well. And so actually, interestingly enough, anyone on your team can sign up and register for the competition. It doesn't have to be just one person, and everyone who signs up for the competition can get those email updates so that everyone will know when we make any of those clarifications. And so some of those clarifications that we've recently put out are around alliances. Any number of FRC or FTC teams can form an alliance, and then each team in that alliance is going to submit your own robot. And then your teams will be scored individually, and then the whole alliance will get that bonus. And again, feel free to put any questions in the chat if you have any as we go along, and we can answer some of those as well. And then, as I mentioned, everyone can receive those resources and reminders if you register for the competition. And so for this competition, we're actually giving out quite a bit in awards. So there'll be a first, second, and third place, all receiving $1,000 in grants. And then we'll have some finalists that are runners-up, someone winning the most unique design, and then some additional awards. And so in order to see kind of how we're judging, we actually do have a rubric on our website as well. So you can look at that to see what the judges are looking for when we're giving out these awards. And then some other resources, well, we are going to be doing a lot of these webinars. Onshape has a really great learning center. So if you're new to CAD, there's actually an introduction to CAD learning path that you can follow, and that'll give you some different instructions and guides to actually start getting introduced to it. Or if you're familiar with CAD, you can be using the Onshape fundamentals to kind of learn what's different about Onshape and get familiar with using that, just because there are some minor things that might feel different if you're coming from a different platform. And so that'll just get you up to speed there. If you are someone that's a mentor that kind of out of work or out of school right now, this is definitely a really great time to start working on those skills and learning a different CAD platform that you can add to your resume. And then for parts libraries, if you want to be using some of those common, whether it's the motors or power systems that robots have, there's a couple different parts libraries you can be using. For FRC, a group called MKCAD has actually put together a part library that has most of those common components. And then FTC team 2901 put together their own parts library for the FTC side. And so for that one, we'll give you access if you email first@ptc.com. We can then add you to that library so you can use all those components. And you can see on the right an example of those submissions. You can also use that as a resource from our website to see what we're actually looking for when you go to submit. And then just some important dates. The competition started on April 3rd. On May 1st, we'll be sending you that submission form. So you'll get that in your email, and we can start getting those in so that on May 15th, you'll be able to submit. And then throughout that whole competition period, we're going to have quite a few webinars to teach you about Onshape and how some other teams are using it. And so some of those webinars, this one, Introduction to Onshape for Teams, working with the FRC kit apart. So that will be that MKCAD part. So if you're wondering how to use that, the best way to work with those, we'll be having someone give that webinar. How you can migrate your team from a different CAD system. So if you're wondering, oh, I have these years of heritage in this other system, but we really want to use Onshape, we'll kind of go through how you can do that. Working with that FTC kit apart, collaboration and versioning, so how you can actually be working together as a team and simultaneously be working, which is something that's really unique about Onshape. And then we're going to have a panel of a bunch of teams that are using Onshape already, so they can talk about some of the things they've learned and how they've managed to set their teams up. And then we'll have a session that's preparing your submission, so just going through again what that final submission should look like, what your Onshape document will need to have in order for us to judge it. And then we'll just have some time where you can ask any questions that you have before you submit. If you're wondering just formatting of something or any general questions, whether it's about Onshape or this contest, we'll be happy to answer those. And so you can also follow PTC Academic on all of these social media platforms to stay up to date on what's going on with Onshape in the academic space, and throughout the season, what we do with FIRST. We'll do some different augmented reality fields for the different programs. So all of our FIRST updates will get posted on those platforms throughout the year. And then on our YouTube channel, you'll actually be able to see replays of these webinars. And so another poll for you, again, it's that same system you've been using. You can either respond at this URL at the top or be texting it. Just wondering how familiar everyone on this call is with Onshape. We've got a mix here. A lot of people have never used it before, so it's definitely exciting. Some who just got started, so maybe you started to take some of those learning pathways. I'm definitely excited to see all these people who haven't used it before. It'll definitely be pretty easy to get going with it. And now is the perfect time where we are home from work and school and able to get working on these things. So I'm gonna move on now. So we have another question for you. Just wondering what you're most excited about, whether it's with the challenge or with learning Onshape. Just curious to see what you are most interested in learning, or again, what you're excited about with all of this. Excited about Onshape. The collaboration, definitely huge. Memes. Learning. Definitely excited that it's web-based. I know my school had Mac, so it was always hard for us to get on CAD. We only had a few people on my team that were able to do it when I was in high school. So it's really good that there are programs like this that everyone can be working on and learning right now and be getting ready for next season. Very cool. Well, I'm glad you guys are all excited about something with this contest, whether it's the learning or the contest itself and designing. There's some really cool words up here that I'm excited to see. But I will now switch it over to Cody so he can actually go into that introduction to Onshape.
All right. Go ahead, Mackenzie.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, just remember you can always be using the chat or emailing first@ptc.com.
Okay, you should be seeing my screen. So what I'd like to do is just introduce everyone to Onshape. I saw a lot of the responses to the question earlier. It looks like almost half the audience hasn't used Onshape yet. So this is meant to be an introduction into Onshape. It's by no means going to be totally inclusive, right? We're going to have to go into more detail, and that's what you saw earlier in Mackenzie's slides showing additional webinars. So we're going to be putting together additional webinars focused towards first teams and in particular this competition. So this is meant to be just an introduction, get you into, what are the fundamentals of Onshape, what does it do, how does it work, and so on. So my agenda is relatively simple. I want to introduce you to Onshape, go over some of the details of how to use Onshape, really how to get the most out of Onshape, and show you a few tips that I have for first teams in particular, things that I think will make Onshape easier to use for first teams. And as Mackenzie mentioned, at the end, we will wrap things up with a general Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. We will make sure to get to those as we wrap things up here. So I want to start with an introduction. What is Onshape? Onshape is a cloud-based product design platform, right? So there are a lot of users out there, a lot of people out there that are familiar with traditional design tools, CAD tools as they're commonly referred to as, and the SolidWorks or the Inventor or the Creo or CATIA. There's a long list of kind of traditional installed CAD systems. Onshape is different. Onshape is built from the bottom up to be purely cloud-based. So keep in mind that a lot of what I'm going to show you here is different than if you have experience with any traditional system like the SolidWorks or Inventor or any of those other traditional systems. It's purely a cloud-based tool. Now I call it product design tool because it's CAD plus PDM, PLM later, right? So keep in mind it's more than just a CAD tool, and I'll go over some of those details when we get into collaboration in just a second. One thing I like to always mention, especially to students, is it runs on any modern browser or mobile device. So you don't have to have an expensive computer if you have a Chromebook, if your school has issued you Chromebooks, or if you have a Chromebook of your own. If you have just a cheap laptop, we're not really as graphics dependent and hardware dependent as many other systems. So you can run on any computer you'd like. You do need to be using a WebGL supporting browser. And so that is Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Edge, Opera. It is not Internet Explorer. I mentioned Internet Explorer, but it's not Internet Explorer. Edge is supported, but Internet Explorer is not. So for those out there using Internet Explorer, please use some other tool for Onshape. But Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Opera, Edge, all supported browsers running WebGL. And that's really the underlying technology that drives Onshape. Now, I mentioned mobile device. There's also a mobile app on iOS and Android. So if you haven't downloaded the Onshape app for those mobile devices, please do. I'm going to show you some tips for working with it in just a bit, but it's a very important part of course, using Onshape. Now, one of the other things that is very important, is going to be very important to first teams out there, and in general is important to people using Onshape, is collaboration. One of the reasons that we built a cloud-based CAD system is to allow people to collaborate in real time on design. So you can be in one room, in one part of the world, another person in another part of the world, and you can work together on the same model at the same time. If you've ever used Google Docs, a lot of students are familiar with Google Docs. Google Docs allows you to collaborate with others in real time. So if you share your document, you can type in text and the other person instantly sees that, right? And so that's what we refer to as real-time collaboration. Onshape has a similar equivalent in CAD, where I can edit a part, change a feature, edit an assembly, do whatever it is I want to do, and the moment I accept, it's instantly updated to anyone in the document. And this is a tremendous benefit to first teams because there's no need to save files. There's no need to check in or out data or pass files back and forth. There's only one single truth in terms of the robot design. It's whatever is the latest in Onshape. So I think that's one of the last things I would point out. Allows you to collaborate with others in real time. But the big things to stress, make sure you're not using Internet Explorer. Make sure you're using Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, or either iOS or Android. All right, so let's dive into what it looks like. And then I'm going to come back for a few tips and tricks that I have for first teams to really get the most out of it. As I mentioned before, this is 100% cloud-based. It's 100% in the browser. So I'm on a MacBook in this example, but I'm running Chrome, right? You could be using any of those browsers that I mentioned on any operating system that you prefer. So it could be Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks, as I mentioned earlier, are also supported. Now, one of the most important things to keep in mind is when you are signed in through the browser, there's of course no download, right? So we still get asked the question often, how do I download Onshape? Well, if you're on a computer, you don't. You go through the browser. Now, the process of signing up is very simple. And once you've signed in, this is what you'll be greeted with. This is what we refer to as the documents page. I want to take a few minutes to go over what a document is, some key pieces of the interface, and then I'll get into actually modeling some geometry and show you some of those differences as well. So as I mentioned before, this is what you'll see when you first sign into Onshape. You can think of this page as a list of your projects, right? Each one of these is either a folder containing documents or a document itself. Now, a document in Onshape is, you can think of it like a project container, right? So a single document can have dozens of parts, dozens of assemblies, dozens of drawings, imported data. So it's a single container. It's not, a lot of people misinterpret it as a single part or a single assembly. A document in Onshape is very much like a project container. And so for many of you out there, your document will be your robot, right? And the entirety of the robot will be most likely designed in a document. So just keep that in mind when you're getting started. A document isn't a single part or a single assembly. It's a container for the entire project. So you can see I have a bike frame document, a leaf blower document. These are all, projects with many parts, right? But they have, everything stored within the document. So that's a document, as I mentioned before. Think of it again as a project container, not so much a single part or assembly. Now, when you're getting started, the first thing that you'll want to do is either create a new document or import geometry. If you have files from other systems or you're importing motors or whatever it may be, either way, to get started, you'll click Create, and you have the option to create a document or import files. And those are the two most common starting places for new users getting started, new people coming into Onshape. They either want to create something brand new or they want to import something from another system or something that was sent to them. And so both of those can be done from the Create button in the top left corner. You click Create and you have your creation options. So that's where you get started, right? Now on the left-hand side, we have various filters, but the one I really want to mention is teams. I'm going to get into teams in a bit. Teams are very much relevant to first teams because they're an effective sharing mechanism. You can easily create a team, add all the individuals that are on your first team to that team in Onshape, and easily share with them. This is the biggest benefit of this is it just simplifies sharing. I'm going to go over sharing in just a bit, but it also makes it easy to search because you can search by things that are associated with that team. right? So I would say that almost every first team that we've interacted with is using Onshape teams as a way of easily sharing, because they can add everyone in the group and easily share that data with them. It also means that, as I mentioned before, it's a very effective way of filtering. I can search by things that are shared with a team. So teams are a very important aspect of Onshape, and especially so for first teams. So that's the filters on the left-hand side. One of the last ones that I want to mention is public. And the reason I mentioned public is a lot of people have shared designs publicly that are very useful, can be very useful, especially for anyone trying to learn to CAD in general, but also first teams. So definitely worth checking out the public resources. I'm going to go over this again later on, but you'll find them under the filter on the left. So you click public, and one tip that I have for you is you can filter by likes, right? That is a particularly useful one if you're trying to find, because the list of public documents is very long. There's a lot of public documents. If you really want to find the cool public documents, you can filter by likes and go through and find the ones with the most likes. I would also encourage you, if you find any public models that you really like, to add a like, just to help us kind of curate the list, so to speak. So that's the public models, a very important resource for anyone new to Onshape. There's a tremendous amount of open source design here. And even if you're just looking at it as a tool to learn how to create certain shapes, this is a valuable resource for that. All right, moving on. What I'd like to do is dive into a document and get started. So let's go back here. And you can see I have multiple tabs at the top. So I have a Documents tab, but I also have a tab here for the leaf blower. And if I switch tabs, you can see I've already opened this particular document. What I'd like to do is go over various aspects of the interface. So, for example, starting at the top, the document toolbar, probably one of the most important pieces of the interface, spans the top. And it has things like changing the units for your design. So if you default to the wrong unit style, you can change that. Custom metadata, if you're adding metadata to your designs. Printing, renaming the document, all those kind of administrative functions. You also have versions in history. Versions in history is, we're going to go over in just a bit, kind of the underlying architecture of Onshape. You'll find that there's no save anywhere in this interface. In Onshape, we don't worry about saving like you would in a traditional system. So everything that you do is automatically saved. So we have versions in history, which is very much like an audit trail, lists everything that's ever happened to the document. We also have the ability to create a version, which in Onshape is like a snapshot of the document at that moment. So if you think you want to come back to the design at some point, you could do that with a version. We also have at the top comments. Comments can be tremendously helpful communication tools between teams. And the reason I stress this is we run into a lot of people in general using CAD who still mark up screenshots, right? They take a screenshot, they mark up the screenshot, they email the screenshot to a person, and they're just taking screenshots of the CAD model. Well, comments can be a much more effective way of communicating about the design with other engineers in your team. So I'm going to go over this in greater detail in just a second, but don't underestimate comments. I think that it's one of the most effective ways to communicate with your team about the design. So then we get into the important pieces of the interface in terms of how you interact with them. And the first is the toolbar. So you see the toolbar across the top. We have, of course, in this case, we're looking at an assembly of a leaf blower. So we're seeing the insert, all the various mates that we have in the toolbar, all the ways that we have to position parts in the assembly, all the various mates. We have all the various relation tools, things to define assembly motion, motion between parts at the assembly level. So the assembly toolbar, like you'd imagine, is there when you go to an assembly. But if I were to switch to a part studio, you would see the toolbar, of course, changes. Because in a part modeling environment, I see part editing features. So I see extrude, revolve, sweep, loft. If you have experience with parametric CAD, these are the kind of standard part modeling features. But the important thing to stress is the toolbar will change depending on what you're doing. So if you're in an assembly, you'll see the assembly icons. If you're in a part studio, you'll see the part icons. If you're in a drawing, you will see drawing icons, right? So that's the toolbar. It's always in the same place. It just changes dynamically depending on what you're doing. Now, to the left of the interface is the feature list. In the part studio, this is the list of features that make up that part, right? And so if you're, again, familiar with many of the parametric CAD systems that are out there, this is a familiar concept. You have sketches and features that make up the various shapes of your part. So on the left-hand side, we have what we refer to as the feature list. It's very similar to other systems in that regard. You can right-click and edit and delete and rename and do all the things that you would expect to do. In the assembly, of course, we have the assembly list, right? So we have our various sub-assemblies. We have mates that make up those various sub-assemblies. So it's just the makeup of our assembly. So part studios are really about the part design. Assemblies are about putting everything together and testing out the movement, the motion of the assembly, because you can't dynamically move things in a part studio. So you create your assemblies, you grab and drag, you test your motion out, you can animate and those types of things. But important to stress, that's the difference between the two. Part modeling is done in the part studio. That's where you do your design work. The assembly is really about putting together all of those parts and testing out the movement between them. So, as I mentioned before, we have parts, assemblies. We also have, of course, drawings. Drawings are a very important final step for a lot of teams out there to communicate with their manufacturers, right? They can create a drawing, submit it, and have those parts made. So we have, of course, the drawing toolbar, which is going to vary from the assembly tool or the part studio toolbar. But the main thing to stress is just the fact that you're going to have parts, assemblies, drawings, various pieces of your document. Now, you may have noticed that at the bottom, I'm going between various tabs, right? So I have these tabs across the bottom. As I mentioned before, the document, you could think of it as a project container. It's not an individual thing. So just keep in mind, you can have the entire robot in a single document. Now, if your robot consists of thousands of parts, several thousand parts, you may split it up a little bit further. But keep in mind, for many users out there, I think that a document is a good starting point for containing that robot. Now, in this example, my project is a leaf blower. The top level assembly is a leaf blower. But I have drawings, I have individual pieces, I of course have sub-assemblies and folders, and they're all accessed via the various tabs across the bottom. So that's the important thing to stress is this is how you get to the various pieces of your sub-assemblies. You just left click the various tabs and go between part and assembly and drawing. Now, it's not just part, assembly, and drawing. You can also import data from other CAD systems. So this is an imported SolidWorks part, but it could be an Inventor part, it could be Creo, it could be CATIA. We import a lot of different geometry. So if you're interested, just check out our help, do a search for imported formats. It will bring up a long list of all the formats that we support. So I mentioned importing SolidWorks parts, but it could be Inventor, it could be other systems. We also have the ability to import things like PDFs, right? So you can actually import a PDF and store it inside the document. This can be useful if you have, maybe brochures that you distribute or just any kind of miscellaneous project-related files, because it's easy for me to import and store as a tab in the document. But just keep that in mind. It's parts, assemblies, drawings. They access via the tabs on the bottom. You can import anything you want into a document. So if you want to import, imported files, you want to import PDFs, you want to import spreadsheets, you could do all that, right? And you could do that via the plus icon in the bottom left corner. So you click the plus icon, you'll see this option to import. This is also where you can, by the way, create new parts, new assemblies, new drawings, and build out your robot project. Right? So that is the key overview of the high-level overview of the various pieces of the interface. One last piece that I want to mention is on the right-hand side. That's the view cube, and it does what you would imagine. It allows you to go to various views very easily, rotate those views around if you want, right? So if you're just looking for standard views, you can easily go to them. But the most important thing here is the view cube drop down, where you can choose to turn on section view. You can choose to show hidden without edges, or show hidden edges visible, right, in terms of your display style options. There's options for interference detection. If you want to know if your robot's interfering, pieces are interfering with one another, you can do that. That's all accessible via this view cube menu. The last bit of the interface to mention are these tabs on the right. We have tabs for bill of materials. We have tabs for configurations. We have tabs for generating exploded views. Unfortunately, we won't have time to go into those now, but that's where you access all those various pieces. So if you're interested in exploded views or the bill of materials or any of that kind of stuff, this is where you find those pieces in Onshape. All right, so I want to get into just a few minutes of creating a new part, and then I want to get into some of the things that really set Onshape apart, make it unique. So I'm going to create a new part studio. So I'm in my bike frame document. I just created a new blank part. I have my default planes, top, front, and right, and I'm ready to start sketching. So I'm going to left click the front plane, right? And I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, the S key, to bring up the sketch tool. Right? Of course, I could just as easily use the toolbar at the top. And notice now that I'm in a sketch on the front plane, the toolbar is again changed to sketch icons. So again, the toolbar will change depending on the environment you're in. Now, one very important lesson that I would give to anyone out there is Onshape is very much dependent on the right-click menu for a lot of things. And so what I often tell people is if you're interested, you're trying to find something, you want to know how to edit, delete, rename, move, anything like that, try right-clicking on that thing. And chances are you'll find a context-sensitive option. And this is a good example. I want to rotate normal to the front plane because I'm on a sketch, I'm on the front plane, but I want to rotate the model so that I'm looking straight at the front plane. That's a command we refer to as view normal to sketch plane. And you can access it by right-clicking anywhere in the empty space. But the big lesson I would give to anyone is the right-click menu is very important. Right-clicking features, right-clicking parts, right-clicking mates, right-clicking tabs, everything. It has a right-click context-sensitive list of options. So just keep that in mind. It's a very important piece of the interface in Onshape. So from here, I'm in a sketch. I'm ready to start sketching. I'm going to, again, use a lot of the shortcuts that Onshape gives me. So you can see I get all these snaps to horizontal and vertical, right? In this case, I want to place a circle right on the center. So I just left click, and now I have my first circle in the graphics. I could do that one more time on the right-hand side of that. Notice I get that horizontal snap. I can, again, left click, and now I have two circles in the graphics. Now, once you've started to add geometry, you'll want to, of course, add dimensions to it. And as I add dimensions, you'll see I get visual feedback as to the level of definition in my sketch. So if I add a dimension to this circle, let's place that dimension, and I type in 25, you'll see that the circle on the left turns black, while the circle on the right is still blue. And it's a visual cue that the circle on the left is fully defined, while the circle on the right is underdefined. And so it's just meant to be little visual cues. That's not unique to us. That's many other CAD systems have it. But I point that out because it's something many people look for. So Onshape itself, it has the Part Studio assembly drawing features that you're used to. If you've come from some other parametric CAD system, you can build the parts, build the assemblies, build the drawings all that you need to inside of Onshape. And really, it behaves in a lot of ways at a simple level, a lot like other systems. There are a lot of little things that we've done that are different, but one of the big things that we've done that is different is how we handle collaboration. And I think this is a really important point for any first teams out there. One of the most important things you're going to need, if in these situations, is to collaborate effectively, to have everyone on the team on the same page. What's different about us is we're not using files, right? So if you create a part or you create an assembly or you create a drawing, you're not creating new files for every part or assembly or drawing. And so you don't have to send someone, you're not emailing someone a file and then email you file back, or you're not using Dropbox or Google Drive. You can share just like in Google Docs, right? So if you've ever used Google Docs, there's a big share button. You click share, you type in the person's email address, you define their permissions, and it allows them into your document, right? So you're not sending someone a copy of your data, you're allowing them into your document. And that's kind of how Onshape works. You click share, and it brings up the share permissions dialog. You define what kind of permissions you want to allow, right? And so in this case, I can say, well, this individual, right, C. Armstrong, has edit permissions. I want to give this person edit permissions. Or maybe I want to restrict it and say you're only allowed to view, right? You can't copy, you can't export, it's entirely up to you what kind of permissions or controls you give. If this were a team member, of course, I might give them edit permission. But if this were a team member, I'd probably recommend sharing with teams, which we're going to go over in just a second. But just keep that in mind. Sharing is very simple. You just type in their email address and define their permissions, right? Can edit, can view, link, export, comment, copy. All of those are separate checkboxes, so you control how much permission you want to give. But that's really it. You hit the share button, and that person is sent an email, right? And so what happens is they're sent an email. They can open up that model and look at that model at the same exact time you are, right? And to show you this, bear with me for a moment here. I'm going to split my screens and show you two different users and what this looks like in real time. So this is two different people in the document, right? And what I'd like to go over are how our collaborative benefits work. And one of the first that I want to mention is real-time collaboration. So let's just say, for example, the person on the left makes a change to this part. So they go in, they edit a sketch. Notice Onshape tells me on the right-hand side, someone is editing this sketch right now. So you see a little visual cue on this side that someone's here, right? It's just meant as kind of a cue, a warning. Hey, you might want to consider editing, something above this in the feature list. You also see, of course, the cue at the top that they're in the document. So we're not sending data back and forth. We're both in the same model at the same time. Now, if I were to change, let's just do a simple change like change the length, right? As soon as I hit the green check, okay, you see it instantly update on the right-hand side, right? Let's make it a more significant change. Let's change the appearance. So I changed the appearance. Let's call it blue. Okay. As soon as I hit the green check on the left, it updates on the right. So there's no save, there's no check-in or any of those kinds of things. That's what we mean by real-time collaboration. These people could be in the same room. They could be across the world. Any change made by anyone is instantly reflected to everyone, right? Now, one more aspect of this is comments. I mentioned this earlier, but it's a very important thing, I think, for teams out there. If you right-click a face or a feature or just about anything in Onshape, you'll see this option to add a comment. If I click add comment, I can tag a person. So at Cody, is this hole diameter correct, right? And I can do that and assign them the task. They will get an email notification, they'll get a pop-up, and they can see the exact face that I clicked on, right? And so if I go back into that comment, I can see this is the face that the person clicked on. It even takes me back to the orientation that they originally created the comment in. So comments, in my opinion, are a very effective way to communicate, right? It's an easy way to right-click an edge or a feature or a part and say, is this the right part? Is this the right value? Is this fillet too small? Those are all questions that a lot of people would take screenshots, mark the screenshot up, email it to someone. All of that can be done with comments inside of Onshape. Now, when I show collaboration, one of the most common questions that I get asked is, well, what if happens if I don't like the changes made by someone, right? Or, how do I know who did what and when they did it? So as I mentioned before, in the versions in history, you can see every little interaction. So you can see this person at this time made this change. If you don't like any of these changes, you can restore to any point in this history. So you can think of this like an infinite undo. Every time you hit OK to anything, it's added to the history. It's forever there, and you can always right-click and restore it. So that is versions in history, but I think collaboration in general is a very big part of using Onshape, especially for first teams. Now, one more aspect of collaboration that I think I should mention is what we call follow mode. So if you're collaborating with someone and you see their icon in the top right, you can double click that icon and you're watching their screen in real time. So if you're on like a video conference with someone or a phone call and you say, hey, what fillet are you talking about that's too big? Well, I can easily go into follow mode and have them point out, hey, this is the fillet that's too big, because I'm looking at their screen in real time. And a lot of times this replaces the need for a dedicated GoToMeeting or something to that effect. But it's a built-in tool. All you have to do is double click their social cue and it takes you into follow mode. You're seeing their screen in real time. So I think the combination of true real-time collaboration with comments and follow mode is really beneficial for students who are trying to build something collaboratively. It really makes a lot of difference when you compare it to kind of a traditional emailing file approach. All right, so I want to wrap things up here with a few tips that I have for first teams. One of the first tips, and this is something that we have a dedicated webinar coming for, so this is something Mackenzie mentioned earlier, but next week there's a webinar on using part libraries. There's a parts kit. There's thankfully some very dedicated robotics teams out there actually made these kits available to everyone. In particular, I remember Team 1836, but I know there are others that have contributed to this. We really appreciate it. Parts libraries, I can't stress that enough. Parts libraries really make a lot of the standard parts that you interact with in the parts kit, you don't have to model. You can just drop them in from those existing libraries. So that's probably one of the biggest tips that I give first teams out there. Don't reverse engineer everything if you don't have to, right? So webinar on this soon, again, next week, solely on this topic, definitely worth checking out. The next one is creating a team. And I want to take a moment to explain where you can do this under your username, right? So you'll have, my account. You have this option for teams. Here you can create a team and add individuals to it, right? So I can create a team and start to add my individuals to that team, right? Now you have members and you have admins. Members can only communicate, they can only work inside of the data shared with them, but they have no ability to add or remove other members. So you'll have admins of the team and you have members of the team. Think about who should control access to the team. That person should be the admin. But that's really it. You give your team a name, you add team members just by typing their email address, define their role, and that's it. And then the most important thing, once you've created a team, is when you go to share, you share with the team, right? And so I share with the machine design team or the mechanical team. And you can have as many teams as you want. So you may have one first team, and then even within the first team, you may have a team focused on electrical and a team focused on mechanical. And you can have several teams and ways of divvying up kind of the group via teams. But I can't stress this enough, especially if you find yourself continually sharing information. Typing in email addresses over and over and over again is not fun. and it's kind of tedious. So creating a team, one of the biggest tips that I have along that same topic is creating a folder. So I mentioned this before, but if you're working with lots of data from lots of different systems, you can import it into a folder and share the folder. And the reason I stress this is if you're out there and you're working with hundreds of imported parts and they're all in different documents, create a folder, add them to the folder, share the folder, rather than sharing hundreds of individual parts. So these are all kind of sharing mechanisms that I like to stress because that's one of the first questions we generally get from first teams. Creating folders is just an easy way of lumping a whole bunch of data together in a folder and sharing it all at once. Right? And you can do that just by clicking create folder, giving it a name, right? And it will create a folder. And you can have subfolders. You can import directly into a folder from here. But the most important thing is when you click a folder, you can share it with your team very easily, right? That's an important thing, especially if you're working with lots of data and you don't want to share dozens or hundreds of things individually. All right, so that's the next two tips that I have for you. Create a team to simplify sharing, create and share folders to simplify sharing large amounts of data. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to share a lot, add it to a folder and share the folder. The other comment is use comments. Use comments are, it sounds very simple, but it is an effective way to communicate inside of a document. So I think it's especially helpful for first teams. The last one is one I mentioned very early on. Check out the public models. There's lots of great public models in Onshape. They're tremendous learning tools. You will find them out there, and I can't recommend it enough as a learning tool, as a way of understanding kind of how people design in Onshape. So that is what I had planned. I'm going to leave things open for some questions and answers. One final comment, I just want to put a final plug out there for the upcoming webinars. So we have a number of upcoming webinars dedicated to first teams over the next few weeks. Mackenzie mentioned them earlier. Please do sign up for those when you get the chance. If you're interested in any other learning materials, check out learn.onshape.com. That's kind of our hub for learning materials in Onshape. So without further ado, I think we will go ahead and jump into questions.
And so I did actually get a few emails in about pricing, and Onshape is completely free for both students and mentors. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that you are able to sign up for free on the education side. And so if you are a mentor, you're educating the students that you're working with, so you're able to sign up for free. Absolutely. If there are any other questions, definitely feel free to put them in the chat. Oh, go ahead.
One question I saw was, does Onshape have an equivalent to Creo's skeleton modeling? We actually have two different, what we refer to as top-down workflows. Skeleton modeling is a type of top-down workflow. We have two different options there. We have the ability to do top-down design in a multi-part part studio, where we create what we call in-context assembly references. So you have two different type of skeleton style modeling techniques. I've seen this question asked a few times also. Will there be a recording of this made available? We are recording this. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Mackenzie. We will put it out available in the future.
Yep, it's going to be on our YouTube channel, so definitely we'll be sharing it out.
Awesome.
And then I do have one more poll question I was going to ask. So I'll take the screen back if I'm able to, Cody. Perfect. And so just another question, what Onshape feature people are most excited about for their team, what they're excited about learning? Following, people are definitely excited about that. I think that's really cool, especially people are learning or as mentors are teaching people how to use CAD. It's really great to watch what somebody else is doing. The way the files are, definitely. Collaboration. I know for me too, so for, again, my school was given Mac computers, so not everyone on the team was able to use CAD because we just didn't have the computers for it. So letting everyone on the team collaborate and having those different teams and different subsystems, letting everyone get set up to work together is something just great about this platform in particular. The feature script, that's something we didn't talk about, but definitely something people should look into. There's some cool ones out there for first team.
Yeah, one page I'd recommend if you're interested is if you go to onshape.com/feature script. There's a lot of curated custom features that are worth checking out. A lot of first teams like the beams feature because it makes it easy to sweep profiles along a path, very common in robot design.
Mm-hmm. And again, we did go over a lot of the features at a high level, but there will be a lot more webinars going forward. And then, like Cody mentioned, there's that learning page that has so much to get more in detail on these different features too. Robots, definitely excited to be continuing with robots. I know I was sad I didn't end up getting to volunteer at any events, any FRC events this season. So excited to keep working on some robot stuff as we continue now. If there are any other last minute questions, again, feel free to put those in the chat. How does Alliance work was put as something in here. So the way the Alliance will work is you find a team, maybe a team in your area or a team that you can find online. Again, you can be collaborating with anyone with Onshape all over the world. So you can find one team or multiple teams from either program, FRC or FTC, and you can be working on the same world problem, but you'll each submit your own robot that solves that problem. And so every team in the Alliance will get the Alliance bonus as part of the scoring. And a reminder, you can look at the scoring in the rubric that we have posted as well. And so you can just be working with that Alliance. Everyone will get the bonus, and you'll each do your own robot that solves the problem. And so that could mean something like your robots hand something off to each other, or they are actually interlocking in some way. Maybe they actually work together to get that problem done, or they independently solve the problem. It's really open-ended to let you guys be creative and come up with whatever you want to solve. And there's a question about 3D printing files from Onshape, and absolutely. Just for fun, I've 3D printed my cat bowl that I made in Onshape. You can definitely be 3D printing from it. And we are reaching the end of the time, so I'll move on. Getting excited to see what you all are excited to be learning about. Just a reminder, we do have all of these webinars coming up. If you sign up for the email in the registration, then you will get reminders about all of these different webinars coming up. And I encourage you to join, especially to learn about those kit parts for both programs. And then if you have any questions at any time, you can always be emailing first@ptc.com. And we'll be responding to you with any clarifications or helping you get into that FTC kit parts, whatever comes up for you.
Yeah, I apologize. It seems like there was a little bit of a problem with the webinar tool, and it seems like some of the questions actually weren't coming in, and we just now see that there were some of them. I think we got to a lot of them actually during the webinar, but if you still have a question that's unanswered, again, I apologize about that. Just shoot us a message at first at PTC, and we'll get back to you. So sorry about that for anybody who's been asking questions.